Having some career cravings? Need more spice and fulfillment in your career? Welcome to Career Cravings Talk Show with your host, Dev Ramcharan. Dev and his guests will guide you to achieve those career goals and dreams. Satisfy those cravings. Now, without further ado, meet your host, Dev.
Well, good evening from beautiful Toronto. This is Dev Ramcharan, and this is Career Cravings. As usual, we've got a wonderful guest that we're going to be speaking with who will share some of the insights that she's gained through the course of a very, very rich and varied career, varied to the extent that we titled this particular episode, The Riches of a Portfolio Career. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Now, this is particularly important in the 21st century at the particular stage that we're in, economically around the world, particularly in Western countries. A portfolio career is a career where we're not dependent on a single thing. We might have a full-time job. We may have on the side a part-time job. We may be running a business on the side. And as in the case of Dr. Laura Hambley, who is going to be speaking with us this evening, we might be writing books on the side likewise and getting them published too. So Laura, welcome to the show. And I would love it if you could introduce yourself to the guests and give us some idea as to what your career has looked like to date.
Yeah, sure. So it's really great to be here. I'm actually calling in from a lake near Whitefish, Montana, and we have a nice little log cabin, and it's really great to be off the grid. And I'm able to work here through technology, through satellite internet and cell towers and whatnot. So it's just great to be here. So in terms of my career, I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, which is a mouthful, but essentially I specialize in applying psychology to make workplaces better. I'm also an entrepreneur, and I'd call myself a serial entrepreneur because I have more than one entrepreneurial venture on the go at any given time. And more recently, I'm a fiction author and a fiction writer, and I go by the pen name Laura Lovett for that project. I'm really passionate about helping people find career fulfillment, helping managers become better leaders, helping teams and organizations be more effective. And I'm also a specialist in distributed or mobile workplaces, which is another of my companies. So I am, again, happy to be here and looking forward to the interview, Dev.
Wow. So it's been quite a journey, hasn't it? And you also, as a pen name, named yourself Laura Lovett. Do you like Lyle Lovett and his music by any chance?
I don't love it. I don't love country music, but I don't mind it either, especially if it's around Stampede time, which in my city, Calgary, is a really big kind of rodeo event. So I can do country, just not 365 days a year.
You've accumulated quite a tremendous series of qualifications, certifications through the years. But can you tell us about your early beginnings? Go all the way back to the beginning in your career. Where did it all start as you moved out into the workplace, taking on your first jobs?
Okay. Wow. Well, my first job was teaching music. So I was a musician earlier on in my life, and I played piano and flute. And I worked through a whole series of examinations through the Royal Conservatory so that by the time I was 16 years old, I was able to start a music studio in my home. And I was able to teach private piano and flute lessons. And I grew from having one student to having 24 students each week. And it was a really great first job because it taught me a lot about responsibility, about mentoring people, about teaching, obviously, but also about organizing and managing my time because I did that throughout my university years, or at least some of my degrees, where I was teaching on the side. So that was my, I guess, earliest beginning. And would you like me to go from there and talk about psychology, Deb, or summer jobs, or what?
Just keep going through.
Sorry?
Just keep going through
okay.
And talk me through how it went moving forward.
Sure. So I ended up doing a psychology undergraduate degree. I did not know what I wanted to do when I got into university. I did not have career counseling. I just knew that I didn't want to be what my father had encouraged me to be, which was become an engineer. I knew that math and science wasn't my passion. My dad was an inventor also, but he was an inventor in the field of water treatment and water filtration. And although I love water, I just didn't want to specialize in water treatment. So I decided that I would just take a mix of courses in my first year, and I got very, very confused about what I wanted to do. And thank goodness I stumbled across a career counseling workshop. It was a group workshop at my university, and I went into that. So by the end of my first year, I had figured out that psychology would be an interesting direction for me. And when I looked at all the names of the courses and personality and abnormal psychology and all this, I thought, wow, this doesn't seem like work. This seems fascinating. So I think that was my first clue that I was headed in the right direction. So then from the undergraduate, by the end of that, I knew that I wanted to go on and do a counseling psychology master's degree, because in order to practice as a psychologist in my province of Alberta, I knew I needed a master's. So I worked really hard to get into that program, did a couple of years of the master's, and then I ended up deciding that I wanted to work for a few years before doing a PhD. I had gone all the way through since high school, and I needed a bit of a break, but I put the break in quotation marks because it really wasn't a break. I actually ended up joining a .com company that specialized in career development technologies, and it was based in New York City, and we had a team of programmers in Toronto, and we had an office in Calgary, and we grew from 3 people, 4 people, all the way to about 30 people within the course of 2 years. And I was managing a team before I was old enough to rent a car on my business trip. So I had a team of about 12 people I managed, and I could not rent a car when I went to New York. So it was interesting to be a leader early on in my career. Learned a lot there, and then went on to move to another company. This was when the .com crashed, so it was around, when was it? So 2001, I left that company, and then I joined a company that specialized more in the corporate consulting side, and we helped identify the competencies and skills of different workforces. So in that company, I got to travel a lot to the U.S. as well, and even to Europe. So I was gaining a lot of consulting experience. And at that time, I knew that I wanted to have 2 things by the time I was 30. One was to have a baby, because I had been married for a few years, and I knew I wanted my first baby at 30. I just had it in my mind, because we wanted 3 kids, and I knew I needed to get started. And the second thing I wanted by the time I was 30 was to have my doctorate. So I knew I wanted that, but I decided that rather than counseling, I had discovered this great area of psychology that I hadn't known too much about, and it's called industrial organizational. And by doing the corporate consulting, I found that I loved the variety and all the different situations and organizations. And when you put people together at work, there's definitely a lot of psychology involved. So I decided that I would go in that direction for my doctorate, which I did. So I'm going to pause here and let me know what else you want to hear.
So, this is no easy series of tasks that you set yourself. It would appear also too, Laura, that from an early stage of your life, you were very strong-minded. Though you may not have had a clear idea exactly what you wanted to do at the beginning, you knew what you didn't want to do. And you were not going to be pressured into doing something that just wasn't who you were or who you are. And that was something that really marked the very, very early stage of your career. It's a great story that before you could actually qualify to be old enough to do your driving test, you were managing 12 employees. That's amazing, because it indicates that strength of mind that was with you at a very early stage of your life moved thematically through to this point in time where you took on a role of leadership. You didn't balk at it. You took it on, you did it, and at a very early stage, and at a very young age, you were able to be successful in doing it. It seems to me, listening to what you've said about the area of interest and reflection that you went into, which is industrial organizational psychology, that you have a feeling and a deep interest in structures, how things are put together, and in particular, how people are put together behaviorally, and how that then affects the ecosystem or affects the culture of an organization. And is that something that is an accurate observation?
It is. I would say, I mean, I became a leader of people in my early 20s, early to mid 20s, and you needed to be 25 to rent a car. So I was 24 years old and managing the team of 12. And I would say you're absolutely correct, Dev. I really love understanding human dynamics in organizations, and I find people just so interesting. I just love people. So yeah, that's me. And making cultures better is definitely something I can stand behind. And I think, unfortunately, that there's a lot of difficult workplaces out there today. There's a lot of poor leadership out there. And if I can make some small difference in that, then I'm happy with my choice of career.
Gotcha. So before we go on with the rest of the journey, and what the rest of the career has looked like, tell me a little bit about that. What's most important to you as a professional? The things that really make you happy when they're actually fulfilled.
What really makes me happy is making a difference in people's lives, helping them to find their passions, helping them to become a better leader, helping them to gain self-insight and to perform better, to be more engaged in what they're doing in life and in work. So that is what I love. I also love innovating and creating. I like being on the cutting edge of things. So whether that's research or practice, I always like things that are new and cutting edge, which is why I've become a serial entrepreneur. I just sort of fall into being excited about the next thing, the next opportunity, the next idea. And then I love inspiring others to come along for the ride. So I think the only way that I've been able to do this is by aligning myself with other people who are motivated and creating really strong teams and collaborative environments in my different companies.
That's wonderful. And when you look at your career up to this point you've just taken us to, let's say that's the first third of the career to date so far. What are you proudest of in that earlier stage?
So the earlier stage being from what cutoff do you want me to use?
The story up to the point that you told us, which was basically you made the decision that you wanted to do two things before 30, which is have your baby and get your doctorate. Mm-hmm. So everything from that point backwards, when you look backwards, what would have been your proudest moments up to that point in time?
I like the way you've split it up, actually. I've never really thought of it that way. So let's talk about under 30, before I hit the big 3-0. What am I most proud of from that time? Yeah, I mean, I definitely was proud that I got the master's and the PhD done. I definitely learned a ton through that. And I was also really proud of my years in the consulting business and in the .com I told you about. I worked really hard. I mean, my 20s were about working really hard and also kind of launching my life, and made some time for travel, got to do some really good traveling in there. And I knew that I didn't want to have kids until my 30s because I knew I wanted to have that freedom to explore and get around. You know, I didn't see as much of the world as I would have liked, but I did a fair amount of travel in there, and I'm really glad I did that during my 20s.
So, if we were to just reflect on that for a second, you're talking to the hearts of millennials today, really, because you were in your 20s, you realized that you had to work very hard, and I imagine you pushed yourself. You really did push hard to get your master's and your PhD at that stage of life, and then to be successful as a consultant. You would have been on the younger end of the scale as it relates to being a consultant with the consultants around you. Though in the dot-com era, there were a lot of people who were Gen X, and they jumped in very, very early to extremely demanding and challenging positions. Something that seems also to be a thing that you have in common demographically with many other Gen X professionals was a high evidence of entrepreneurial spirit, a desire to push hard, to go out on your own and to explore for yourself. I love the way that you described just now, an aspect of what you were proud of, and that is achieving a kind of balance. So unlike typical baby boom professionals, you were not all about work. You were also about travel and balance and the freedom to explore, which I think it's really good for people who are millennials and people who aren't millennials to hear that, because those are the sorts of things that do tend to add that additional element of richness and exposure to our careers. So that was wonderful. I think it was a very, very marvelous early stage of your career. So then you went on forward past the dot-com blow-up that took place around 2001, when all of these wonderful companies fell through the cracks, and they just didn't keep up, and it affected the workforce worldwide. How did you survive through that period, and how did you then move through the next stage of your career?
I mean, I survived that period by knowing when to get off the ship that I was on, because the ship of the dot-com, I mean, it was sinking. However, that dot-com took a long time to sink after I left. I mean, it was actually going on for years after that, but I just knew it wasn't the right work environment for me anymore. So it's a matter of knowing when to get out of something. And then, then I joined another firm that was somewhat doing better. However, we were acquired by a U.S. company, and they laid off our Canadian team. And it was a really difficult period of my life, actually, because everything was going really well in that company, and I was learning a lot, and I had a great mentor who lived in England. And I just, when we were all laid off, it was really sudden, and they locked us out of the office. And it was one of those situations where I had already done the legwork to apply for the PhD, and I knew that was something I was planning to do in a few months. But just to be let go and laid off so suddenly was a really tough transition point for me. But I'm glad I went through it now, because we work with a lot of clients in Calgary Career Counseling and Canada Career Counseling who have been laid off, and just going through it yourself just makes you better able to relate to the emotions around it.
When you think about that time, Laura, the layoff, can you tell me a little bit about some of the survival techniques you used to get through that? Because in this day and age, it's a very, very common experience for people.
It is. We formed what we called a success group at that time. So there was a handful of us, and we would meet every week for coffee at a coffee shop, and we would all discuss what each person was doing, and we'd lend support to one another. We would share our networks. It was a really, really good concept, because it just got you out there and supporting one another. And my other technique was I always knew I wanted to write a fiction novel. And funny enough, after the layoff, I went through, I guess, a career crisis where I was very confused about whether I should become a fiction writer and write novels, or if I should do my PhD in industrial psychology. And I actually went to a career counselor. I had some benefits through the company that I had left. I had I think, a package I could use towards that. And I found a really great career counselor in Calgary, and I said, this is my dilemma. I mean, I would love to write fiction novels. I've always had a vivid imagination, and I have an idea for a novel, but I really like the idea of the PhD and getting that done, and I like the idea of helping people through the field of psychology. So we really picked apart that decision, and she was very wise. She was later in her career. She had seen a lot, and she really worked with me through the decision. And I mean, being a high achiever, it's interesting. People think high achievers are risk takers, but the risk of becoming a novelist was too high of a risk for me. I needed something that was a more sure thing. I didn't want to fail at writing novels. I didn't want to put myself out there at that stage of my career and find out that I wasn't very good at it or that I couldn't get published. So I decided that I would write the novel as a hobby, and instead I would do the PhD. But I remember thinking, what am I doing, right? It's another 3 years of school, and I'd been used to earning good money and having, a career, and to go back to school was a really tough transition for me. But the novel got started that summer. So without the layoff happening, I don't think I would have started the novel at that time. I just wouldn't have been able to fit it in.
Sometimes a layoff or that dreaded termination can actually make you as a career person, and it can make you as a professional, strengthen you and push you in a completely different direction that you needed that trigger to be able to take. So, wow. So at an early stage, when career counselors were seen as witch doctors by many people, what's that? You actually went out there and spoke to a career counselor. And in this day and age, I'm surprised continually about the way that this particular profession has improved and increased, given the fact that I'm now talking to executives who are taking their teenaged children to career counselors so that they can frame what their future might be like, aligning it with who they are authentically as individuals. That would have been something that would have been an incredible boost for us at that age. But it's an amazing thing. So you've probably seen a lot of developments in that particular sphere too, haven't you?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I chose to specialize in that. And I mean, I knew what career counseling was because I had done a master's degree specializing in that. So a lot of people who specialize in things don't think they need it for themselves. But I'm glad that I had the insight to know that I didn't have enough insight and I needed the help of a professional to figure out my career. And I really believe that all kids in high school should have a really excellent career counseling experience, and unfortunately the high schools are under-resourced in order to deliver that. So career decisions are often made by chance and with limited information about self and limited information about career options. So to me that's really sad, and that's something that Megan Reed and I are really working on, trying to make a difference in the country on career development.
Excellent. That's wonderful. So you get through your particular time and your struggle following a layoff, and you choose to write on the side as a hobby, as opposed to something that you were going to dedicate your life to. How did things then move from there forward?
Okay, so in terms of the next stage of my career?
Yes.
Okay. So then I had my son, Nicholas, and so I had him when I was 30. I had my PhD done. The baby and the PhD, the timing was pretty tight. I was actually 5 months pregnant when I defended my PhD. So maybe they felt sorry for me. But I got it done, and then I graduated and walked the stage, and he was a little baby. It was really cute. I have some nice photos of me wearing the funny hat and holding the newborn baby. And so, I mean, it worked out well, but actually that was another really difficult period of my life because I didn't realize how much of a transition it would be to have a baby. And then I suffered a bit of postpartum depression, which I also didn't expect. And it really propelled me into a state of mind where I was doubting what I would do next. I was doubting whether I would have enough options. I had set myself up to go into a private practice with another psychologist, and then she had moved away to another province, and we were trying to work from a distance, but I wasn't getting much support. And then I had to go back onto the job market. So it was I felt less secure and less confident than I thought I would. And I think a lot of that has to do with the post-pregnancy hormonal shift that women go through. And about, I don't know what percentage, but there are women that go through postpartum. It's a real thing, and it really impacts your ability to make clear decisions and to think positively about yourself. So that first experience, and then my subsequent mat leave transition experiences led me to work on a 3-year project about how we can make maternity leave career transitions better for women in Canada. So Avra Davidoff on my team is leading the project, and I've been working alongside her for 3 years, and we've just launched a book into the market for employers, and we're launching a book for women. And we talked to employers and women from throughout the country and did focus groups and surveys. And because having gone through that experience, I really wanted to make a difference in career development for women, because it is a tricky time when you're balancing having babies and figuring out your career.
Yeah, wow, and it's very complex. I've seen many colleagues who are women come back to the workplace after parental leave, and redetermining and reasserting who they are and what their profile is in the organization. It's quite a complex activity, isn't it?
It's very complex. Yes. So that was a shift, for me. And then I ended up I actually got the opportunity to work with a company that was based in Montreal, and they had work in Calgary. So they had national clients that needed a consultant in Calgary. So that was great because I was able to learn so much from that group. They were a consulting firm of about 30 or 40 industrial psychologists from Montreal and Toronto, and I was able to really learn a lot about what it's like to manage a practice. And I learned so much about the craft because in school, you learn a lot about the theory, but I really learned so much by practicing and working with different corporate clients and growing that business. Started out as me, and then it turned into 4 psychologists and an admin assistant. And it was really fun to be a part of that and to grow the business. And I ended up staying there for about, I think it was 3 years. But it felt like longer because, again, it was just a busy, really rich learning experience. And so, yeah, that was my next stepping stone.
Wonderful. Just wonderful. So this is great. So then you moved from here where? What did you do next?
So then next, after that, I decided to start my own business. I went through another bit of a transition, but I knew that environment wasn't right for me anymore, and I hung my own shingle is what I did, and that was 7 years ago. So 7 years ago from when I started my own business. So it's been an interesting 7-year period of time, but what I did is I had been doing career counseling on and off for many, many years before that, and I was going to just brand it as myself. And my brother-in-law said, "You should put up a website." And I said, "Well, that's a good idea. Well, I guess I should just call myself something bigger than Laura Hambly. So I'll call myself Calgary Career Counseling because then it looks like it's bigger than me." And that was the perfect name to choose. And it led to a lot of people calling for help. And it led me to have to build a team and build a business. While at the same time as doing that, I also partnered in the Leadership Success Group, which was a leadership and team development practice with other consultants and industrial psychologists. So that one we launched at the same time, so that I had the both of them going on. And it was my first foray into running a business, so I had to learn all about, accounting and financials and all these different aspects that I didn't really have to know as much about when I was working for someone else.
Wow. And when you look back over the last 7 years, what are the things that you're proudest of?
Oh my goodness. I am proud of the team that I've put together, and it's been trial and error. I mean, I won't lie. There's been some hires that I've made that I just want to laugh or cry at how bad the decisions were. But at the time, you make the decisions for certain reasons, and then you've got to backtrack, and you need to learn when to move on from someone who isn't a fit. So I've learned that. But I'm a sensitive person, so it's really hard for me to hurt people's feelings, because I don't like hurting people's feelings. But it's balancing those tough decisions in a business. You've got to get rid of people that aren't a fit. So I'm really proud of the team that I have. I'm proud of the people that I've mentored over the years. I've mentored a lot of students by being an adjunct professor at the university. I've mentored a lot of students that come and work for my practice. I've mentored provisional psychologists that go on to become fully registered psychologists. So I'm really, really proud of that. I'm proud of all of the people that we've helped in Calgary, but also beyond Calgary, because we do a lot of work with clients throughout the country using Skype and GoToMeeting and doing distance career counseling. So that's been really good. I'm also really proud of Work Evolution, which essentially I was doing years of research on, starting with my PhD, on how do you lead and motivate people when they're working at a distance. So I specialized in distance leadership back then, and I had an undergraduate student who was my research assistant, and he was just gung-ho. He was such a superstar. So he started working with me on the research, and then we started publishing papers, and I co-authored a book called Growing the Virtual Workplace, and we were chipping away at this whole idea of people being able to work when and where they're most effective, so people being able to work from home part of the time, teams being distributed. And then he went on to do his PhD at the University of Western Ontario, and we kept in touch. And then about 3 years ago now, we decided that we had enough data that we could create a personality profiler for remote workers. So why is Dev able to work effectively from home, whereas Sally struggles with it, for example? So we're able to pinpoint a person's personality and their ability to work from a distance. So Tom and I said, we should commercialize this, and we should, try to sell assessments around the world on this, because it's a really unique type of psychometric profile. So we ended up launching Work Evolution, and it was about 2.5 years ago now that we launched it, and it's taken on a life of its own as well. And I wasn't really intending to launch another business per se, but one thing led to another. And when you're launching assessment tools, well, you need a name, you need a business, you need an accountant, you need a lawyer, you have IP, and one thing leads to another. And Tom's a full-time professor, and I run my other business, and now we have this other one on the go. So it's kind of morphed into it, but it's also really exciting because it's on the cutting edge. I'm able to have conversations with people from around the world on this topic, and we're thought leaders on the topic. So it's just kind of fun being an expert on that. And our latest excitement is that we got interviewed for Scientific American magazine for September. So Tom and I are in that magazine, which to me is kind of neat. My dad always read that magazine growing up, and it just feels like, wow, that's something to be proud of.
My goodness, Scientific American, are you kidding me? It's totally something to be proud of. That's unbelievable. Wow, that will be some remarkable exposure for your practice and your group of companies and the work that you actually do. So, the whole Work Evolution piece satisfied your deep need for innovation and to be involved in the cutting edge, because it is cutting edge thinking. I mean, you were looking at this stuff and doing work on research related to it long before it really hit the general population the way it has today, with the globalized multinational organizations and teams that we have in companies everywhere. So this was amazing work being done in an early stage, whose time has really come, hasn't it?
It really has, Dev. But it's definitely been challenging. It's definitely been a journey, and some days I think, wow, this thing is a lot of work, and it really hasn't paid off yet the way that we've wanted it to. And I think part of that is because it's a little bit ahead of its time still. I mean, companies are starting to talk about it and do more mobile and remote work, but sometimes they don't quite realize the impact on people and the fact that we need to understand the people in order to make sure that your culture is still strong and that people transition into these new ways of working effectively. So we're kind of telling the story and trying to really get the fact that this is important out there. So it's not like selling something that everyone understands and it's clear what it is. It's like selling something that is still cutting edge.
Got it. Well, this is marvelous. So when you look back at your career, you've had quite a significant list of materially important accomplishments under your belt, but you also had your times of struggle. You've told us what you're proudest of. Can you share with us as you look back in time, what were the times of the greatest struggle for you, and what would be the advice you would give to people, particularly millennials today, about getting through struggles like the ones you went through?
Well, the struggles, I think I've told you the main ones, the maternity leaves, and I've had 3 maternity leaves. So I have a 10-year-old son, an 8-year-old son, and a 5-year-old daughter who's turning 6 in a week here. So each of those maternity leaves, I got postpartum depression, and each time it got worse. So just dealing with that and being a psychologist, and I think realizing when you need help is critical, whether it's help on your career, whether it's help on your personal well-being, whether it's help to do with your physical health. I'm a big believer in getting support people in my life, like a coach, right? So I have a coach that works with high-achieving women, and she's awesome. She's fantastic. She's out of Edmonton, and she's made a big difference for me. And then I've had to have a psychologist in the past as well, and I know that I will again in the future because all of us face curveballs, and I know that the next time a curveball comes, I will get a psychologist. I'll get the type of help that I need. So I would recommend to millennials to try to get support people in place, try to have a mentor. I've had some good mentors over the years, that's for sure. And I continue to have mentors in my life, and they're so important to be there to guide you and to provide wisdom. And I can't underestimate the importance of mentors. And the other advice to millennials is take your time to figure it out. I think the worst way to figure out a career is just to launch into post-secondary education with no direction. That's a really expensive and emotional way of doing it, just taking a myriad of courses and thinking that's going to help figure out what you should do when you grow up. I think that there's a process for this. There's systematic ways of helping people gain self-insight. And again, I'm glad that I got career counseling myself. And yeah, so those are some of the ways that I'd recommend going through transitions is getting the support and having a social network around you as well as a network of professionals.
Good. And, Laura, I'm going to ask you a couple of tougher questions now, as if the ones that we've talked about so far have not been all that tough. But this is more looking at the essence of who you are as a professional, as a career person, and as an entrepreneur. So if I would ask you the question, Laura, what is the change that you are here to make as an entrepreneur and as a professional before you hang up your spurs and say, that's it, I'm retiring? What's the big change that you would like to be able to make?
Sure. I don't think I'll ever retire, first of all. But what the change I would like to make is, to continue, a few things. I mean, I want to make sure that my new companies are successful. So Canada Career Counseling, which is opening in Toronto by the very talented Megan Reid at the helm, I want to make sure that that's successful. So I want to take what was done in Calgary and I want to grow that same type of concept in Ontario. And I want to be able to help people from throughout the country find meaningful and fulfilling career directions through working with career psychologists. So I want that to be a success. I want to be remembered for being a great leader. I want to be remembered for being a great mentor. I really want to have a nonprofit at some point. So all the things I'm learning about business, I want to transform into some sort of nonprofit venture. I think that would be really, really fulfilling to make a difference that way. And I think most importantly out of all of it is to raise well-adjusted, creative kids. And to me, it's always a balance of trying not to work too much. And some people think I work 60 hours a week, and that's not true. I work more like 30 hours a week, but I'm trying to cram 60 hours a week into 30, and that's why I'm constantly and chronically behind. But I have a really good support team around me to delegate to. But raising kids that are well-adjusted and creative and helping my 3 kids launch their careers. And my oldest wants to be an airline CEO, so he's written to 10 different CEOs of airlines with an idea for a new airline called Rare Air. And he came up with the idea. I didn't. I just opened the door for him to do this. And let's get your idea down. Let's, design a logo. You design a logo. And he's done it all. And it's really, really exciting to see a kid blossom with ideas. And that's really meaningful to me, is if I can raise my kids successfully, that's the most important thing of all.
Wonderful. And if you were to have your 18-year-old self or your 21-year-old self sitting in front of you right now, what would you tell her?
That things always work out. I mean, things always work out. There's going to be bumps along the way, but follow your passions. I mean, that sounds cliche, but do what you're good at, and success will come if you do what you're good at and you work hard and you align yourself with the right people. So that's what I would say.
Good. Now, Laura, there may have been some things that we didn't get to talk about that you would like to have spoken about. Jump in there and tell me anything you'd like to share with the audience.
Sure. I think that writing a novel I'm doing this because of a couple of reasons. So I wrote my novel, as you know, I started it before my PhD, which was in 2002. And then I did my PhD and had my children and started companies. So I did not have much time for that novel. So it actually took me 8 years to finish. And I just plugged away whenever I could, mainly in the summers, mainly from our cabin in Montana, where I am right now, overlooking the lake, plugged away at it. And then once it was done, I just couldn't fathom how I would bring it to market. I just didn't have time. And then serendipity happened. And about 2 years ago, I met a mother in the school who had a kid in kindergarten with my son. And she works with authors. And she is a communications and PR person with writers. And so it was serendipity, but I put myself out there, right? I love to meet people. My network is large, I would say very large. And I met her, and the stars aligned, and she's helped me get to where I am today with that novel. And I couldn't have done it without having that support. So I have a team to help me with the novel. And the great thing about the novel is I had fun writing it. People are entertained by it. It's called Losing Cadence, and it's gaining a lot of really, really good reviews. So I guess what I want to say to people is if you have an idea for a book or a creative project, there's never going to be time for it. You've got to make time. You've got to make time, and if I can do it, anyone can do it. Because I think people, time is an excuse for a lot of things, lack of time. But if you can chip away at something 1 page at a time, 1 hour at a time, you can make significant progress over time on anything that you want to accomplish.
Okay, marvelous. And if you were to say something to millennials today to just encourage them in probably one of the most difficult economic climates any generation has seen, what would be the 1 or 2 things you'd want to share with them?
Avoid perfectionism. So earlier on in my career, I was more of a perfectionist for sure. And high achievers tend to be perfectionistic. So trying to do everything perfect, not going to work. Because the busier you get, the less time you're going to have to make things perfect. And perfectionism is an endless struggle because nothing's ever perfect in life. So trying not to do everything perfect. For example, if you want to write a book, just get stuff down on paper. It doesn't have to be perfect, but if you never start the book, nothing's ever going to happen. So just launching into things and not being stifled by perfectionism, I think would be a really good piece of advice for any generation. And I mean, millennials, when I was at that age that millennials are now, I think just continually diversifying your skills and getting lots of experiences. And if the market is tough, getting volunteer experiences, getting internships overseas, really looking beyond where you live. And I wish I had done more of that. I lost my dad at an early age when I was in university, and then I felt like I really didn't want to go away for my master's because I didn't want to leave my mother. But in hindsight, I really wish I had gone away because I think it just broadens your experiences. And so I would give that advice to millennials. I think there's nothing like having international experience. I think a gap year is a really great way to make or to grow yourself, and a gap year that's purposeful and planful where you actually continue developing skills within the gap year through volunteer work, through travel, is a really good idea in a lot of cases. And unfortunately, society and parents and stuff often pressure kids against doing gap years. So we're advocates of the gap year.
Gotcha. Well, that's marvelous.
And the gap year could be after an undergrad, right? The gap year could be after high school, after undergrad. It could be 2 years. It doesn't have to be a 1-year thing after high school. It can have a lot of different forms.
So I guess one final question I'll ask you is related to the whole issue of post-secondary education. There are people that are out there saying today that it's not a wise investment for young people to make because the return on the investment is questionable. Sometimes it's never achieved. And for someone as well as educated as you and involved in career counseling, what would you say to critics who say things like that today?
Oh, I think post-secondary education is very valuable. I think that's where you learn to be a critical thinker. That's where you learn to continue to develop a network. That's where you learn to continue persevering and working hard, managing your time. But I think my issue is that people should decide on a career direction and then figure out which education makes sense for that career direction. I don't like the reverse where people go in directionless. I think that education is expensive and it is an investment. So if we can at least choose something that's in the right direction or path of someone's career, I think that is the better way to do it. But I'm absolutely an advocate for post-secondary. Not necessarily university for everyone. I think it depends on the person, depends on their aptitudes and their talents and their interests. But I am a huge fan of that investment.
Marvelous, marvelous. Look, Laura, it's been an absolute delight speaking with you. You've had a rich, complex, and varied career that I think is quite impressive. And I think also, too, it teaches a significant amount of lessons to all generations who are in the workforce today. So, once again, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your that enjoyment that you have in Montana at your cottage to actually be on the show with us. I congratulate you on the upcoming interview with the Scientific American, because I think that's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity, and I also congratulate you in the opening up of an office in Toronto for the Canadian counseling with as you said, the talented Megan Reid, because I think she, who I have in fact interviewed over the last while, will be a tremendous leader in that sphere. And as to the success of your companies and wanting them to succeed as a key career goal for you, I'm pretty confident, having heard the things that I've heard, that you're well on the way to seeing that dream actually accomplished. So thank you very, very much for being on the show.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.
All right, folks. Well, we've just had our interview with a wonderful guest. And now, after a few bars of music, we will move to the second segment. So we've just talked to Laura Hambley, who is a really wonderfully rich and complex personality, as well as someone whose gifts are quite remarkable. From an early stage in her life, she had a sense of something that she wanted to do that she hadn't yet fully defined. It hadn't yet fully crystallized for her. She knew what was not suited to her. That wasn't just about being cussedly sort of against the direction of a loved one. It was that she knew herself well enough at that early stage of her life to understand it really wasn't an area, engineering, especially water-related engineering, that would be satisfying to her and help her to develop a strong career path that aligned with who she was. So early on, there was an intuition about who she was and what would be important to her. Some of the things that we learn from her as we reflect on this wonderfully varied and rich career is that you don't have to know absolutely exactly who you are or what you want to do at the start of your career. That is something that can emerge over time. And Laura had the wisdom throughout her career to reach out to people who would be supporters, reflection points, mirrors, who would be individuals that could give her feedback and mentor her. Now, that takes a significant amount of humility, because in this day and age, the more high achieving you are as an individual, the more likely it is that you might actually be an individual who is independent to the point that to see any kind of reliance on other people might be perceived by the individual as a bit of a failing, a shortcoming, something that involves you being inappropriately dependent on others. But Laura has come to understand, as we all should understand, that that is absolutely the opposite of the truth. That the greatest victories, the greatest accomplishments that we have are made usually in community. That community-mindedness has been with her from the very beginning, through her university years, through her early job experience. You remember the job where she had her first layoff, and I can tell you from experience, having had one myself in my career, it is psychologically devastating. You might feel initially as if there is a degree of relief and now you can move on to something else or whatever the case may be. But ultimately, there's a terrific sense of something having fallen apart, and it can hurt terribly. So the fact that she and her colleagues put together a group of people that met as a success team, helped each other, coached each other, encouraged each other, shared techniques with each other, is really quite a wonderful thing. And back then in the dot-com days, it was a rarity these were actually cutting edge things that she was involving herself in at a very, very early stage. The area of independent research that she decided to go into related to remote employees is quite interesting. And the fact that she was doing that way back before it really was the incredibly global phenomenon that it has become. It would have been once again at an early stage. So Laura had a gift that she didn't realize she had, which was the gift of jumping on trends early enough so that she might be able to harvest through a process of study, of research, and of collaboration, be able to harvest for herself tremendous successes along the way. She's built multiple companies, not just one. And sometimes people wonder, what kind of person is there, in my life that I know who has that kind of entrepreneurial gift and has the sort of magical ability. And it's not magical; it's just a lot of hard work, a lot of creative imagination, and a lot of sharing with other people. What kind of people do we have in our lives that we know that are like that? Well, they must be people that are like human computers. They must be superhuman. They must be the kind of people that I could never even imagine myself approaching, let alone being anything like. But with Laura, we've met a warm, human, empathetic, caring, considerate individual who also has a strong head for business and the ability to be able to build structures that pay off in the end with results that are outstanding. So I have no doubt that the things that she wants to achieve are actually going to be achieved as she moves forward with the rest of her career. Now, she said she's never going to hang up her spurs. And for a Calgary girl, that's a big deal, not hanging up your spurs. She is a gritty individual. She's got grit, what the Brits call stick-to-itiveness, not somebody who easily gives up. She talked honestly about the experience of postpartum depression, which is a very real and can be a devastating experience, and the way in which she worked her way through the three times that she had to deal with it, each a little worse than the time before. And yet, these experiences did not weaken Laura Hambley. They strengthened her, made her a richer individual, better able to connect with people in all of their struggles, in all of their trials of life. So what we have in front of us is a wonderful paradox in the world today, and that is someone who is truly a talented entrepreneur and is going to do some remarkable things. I can't wait to hear one day about the nonprofit organization that she starts, and what you'll probably find is when she gets into a nonprofit and starts a nonprofit, it will consume all of her time. So she will do what she has normally done, and that is develop a very talented team, able to carry the can for her in the businesses that she has, in the business units that she develops as she develops and gives wings to her nonprofit organization. She is an altogether talented and remarkable individual, and this is a story that is very, very inspiring. The paradox includes not just that great gift for entrepreneurship, but it includes a deep, warm compassion that marks everything that she does, all the interaction she has, and also, as she indicated, has given her struggles sometimes when she's had to correct or lay off or part company with individuals who've not been working for her or under her in her organizations. But all that aside, what we have is a picture in many ways of the new professional. This is a 21st century professional to the core. That wonderful mix of humanity as well as drive, endeavor, and ambition is what will mark the most capable and the most successful people in the world in which we live. She's been wonderful to talk to, and it's been wonderful having you this evening as my listeners all around the world. And I hope that you tune in next time when we work to satisfy some of your career cravings and have a wonderful guest to be able to speak to at that point in time. All the best. This is Dev Ramtrand signing out from beautiful Toronto. Talk to you soon.
Well, that's our show. Thank you for joining us here at Career Cravings. Tune in to our show in 2 weeks, same place and time. We wish you the career you deserve. Until next time.